Welcome. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. My name is Tasneem Raja. I'm going to be your moderator for the next 45 minutes, and we're going to be talking about why we decided to start a local news organization. We know that starting a newsroom that starts a neighborhood or a small town or a much bigger community, but in this case, we're going to be focusing on neighborhoods and small towns. It comes with its challenges, right? So we're going to be talking with four people who have taken the plunge, are doing something that they likely haven't done before. We're going to talk about what they've learned, what they're trying, what they're experimenting with, and how they came to make this decision. So to introduce myself briefly, my name is Tasneem Raja. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Oaklandside. We're a nonprofit news organization serving Oakland, California. And I'm also a co-founder of Cityside. Cityside is a parent organization to Oaklandside and Berkeleyside, both in the East Bay here in Northern California. I'm sure you're starting to hear a theme. And our model is one in which we're hoping to build community through local journalism by helping local newsrooms do what they do best and supporting them in terms of fundraising, sustainability, organizational culture, and so on with an umbrella organization. So that's me. I'm going to now introduce you to our excellent co-panelists. We have with us Norine Dworkin. Norine, please say hi. Just give us a quick wave so people can know who you are. Hi, Norine. Norine is a 30-year journalist who's written for regional dailies, alternative newspapers, and national magazine. And Norine is now the founder and editor-in-chief of the local nonprofit news site VoxPopuli in West Orange County, Florida. And I'm sure she's going to be telling us a lot about that experience. We also have Andrew Phillips. Andrew, give us a wave. Andrew is a longtime journalist and Door County native who has reported for regional and statewide newspapers in Wisconsin and Iowa. He founded Door County Knock in 2020. Thanks, Andrew. And as somebody who also founded a nonprofit local newsroom at the start of a global pandemic, we have lots to talk about. We have Irene Romulo, excuse me. Irene, if you could please give us a wave. Irene is an organizer turned journalist who co-founded Cicero Independiente in Cicero, Illinois. She leads the organization's fundraising and community engagement efforts. And as a former Chicagoan, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your work. And lastly, we have Sonam Vashi. Sonam, give us a wave. Sonam is a co-founder and co-director of Canopy Atlanta, a community journalism nonprofit that trains and reports in collaboration with Metro Atlanta communities. She's an award-winning journalist who's written for the New York Times, ProPublica, National Geographic, and several other outlets as well. So that's our panel. Just to give you guys a little bit of the run of show, we're going to be talking for 30 minutes with questions that I have for this great group. And then we all know that audience Q&A is often the best part of these conversations. So we're going to be saving at least 15 minutes to give you an opportunity to talk as well. And please feel free as we're going along to share questions in the chat. The chat function is over on your right. And I'll be either saving those for the end, or if I see stuff that's really relevant to the conversation that we're having in the moment, I might just go ahead and weave some of your questions in as well. So what I'd like to do is start by asking all of you to tell us about the community you're working in. What's special, what's strange, what's exciting, what's particular about your neighborhood or your small town, and what is your relationship to it? Norine, let's start with you.
So the community that we cover with VoxPopuli, we cover two small cities and two very small towns, and I'll start with Winter Garden. It's a small city. It kind of grew up and grew quickly. It grew out of the citrus community. It's a small local Florida community, and I don't know. There's not a whole lot to tell about it. They didn't have a strong newspaper representing it, so they were ripe to have a community paper come in and
What's one thing you wish people either in your community or in the rest of the country knew about where you are?
One thing that I wish that they knew. It's changing. It used to be incredibly conservative, and the area is changing. We're in the I-4 corridor, the part of Florida that goes for Biden and went for Obama. So the rest of Florida is red. Where we are is blue. So
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. Andrew, how about you? Tell us a little bit more about Door County. What's interesting to you about it? What's surprising? What do you wish people knew about it?
Sure. So for anybody who's not familiar, Dworkin County is a peninsula in northeastern Wisconsin, sort of jutting out into Lake Michigan, and we're a big tourist destination in the Midwest. So I think that's something to know about it if you're not familiar with Dworkin County. If you are familiar with Dworkin County, it may be as sort of a vacation destination. And a lot of what we are working on and what I wish people knew about our community is sort of the richness of life here in terms of year-round residents and some of the economic disparities that happen in part because of the tourism industry. That those are kind of some of the issues that we focus on covering and trying to provide a news source for our community and providing a better public discourse.
Great, and I think it's helpful to get into the scale. Norine, how large is the community that you're covering? Andrew, the same question for you.
Winter Garden is about 49,000. Ocoee is about the same, just a little less. Windermere has only about 3,600 people, and Oakland has just under 4,000. So it's a balance of small town life with small city life. So Ocoee and Winter Garden are dealing with growing pains. Interestingly, Windermere and Oakland are also dealing with some of the same issues, but on a different scale. So, and we're also dealing with things of like racial inequities. So, and those are the kinds of things that we cover in our publication.
Great. Andrew, give me one number. How many people live in Door County?
30,000.
30,000. Okay, great. Sonam, let's go to you. What is interesting, fascinating, misunderstood about the communities you're covering? And tell us more about that, please.
So we're a little different at Canopy Atlanta than Andrew and Norine's organizations. We typically serve a region of 5 million in Metro Atlanta, and there's a lot of different news organizations, a lot of great ones. But our approach is really different in that, you know, Metro Atlanta is a really is not a great term, but like a really balkanized area. There's so many different small cities that have popped up for a lot of different reasons, a lot of, you know, economic inequality and racial inequality reasons in some cases. A lot of folks who are just outside city limits may not even know what municipality they live in. There's just such different layers of government, of community, and the way that people tend to identify in Atlanta is not only you know, just as an Atlantan, but it's also really deeply rooted in your neighborhood. Like I live in Westview, West End, Atlanta, and like people rep West End. And so what we really figured out is that despite our thriving, you know, news ecosystem, there were a lot of communities that were just not being heard. Atlanta is often a very top-down environment, like a lot of other cities. And so we really saw the need for a community kind of approach to journalism. And so we really focus on communities and neighborhoods within the Metro Atlanta area that, especially ones that are communities of color, lower income communities, and just don't have really responsive news. And there's quite a large number of them is what we're finding.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Irene, tell us about Cicero.
Hey, everyone. So I grew up and live here in Cicero, Illinois, which is a small town on the southwest side of the city of Chicago. It's about 84,000 people, over 80% of which are different generations of Latinx people who, you know, are bilingual or just Spanish speakers or just English speakers. It's a town that has seen a lot of demographic changes starting in the 90s. It used to be a mainly white immigrant, like working class town. And, you know, in the 90s, we started seeing a lot more Latinos coming in and really like making this their home. And now it's a majority Latinx town that where the leadership and like people in positions of like institutional power, whether intentionally or not, have made it very difficult for people to become involved in civic life and in knowing like what's happening in their local governments and having a say in what's going on there. And really it was for me like investigating why, like as somebody who grew up here, like I had never attended a board meeting, like what like those barriers were that really got me into like thinking about like, well, why isn't it easier to find information about what these people are voting for? Like, why isn't it easier for me to participate? And like one of the reasons why we decided to start bilingual paper in a place that didn't have one before. Like there used to be earlier on a very local paper that was called the Cicero Live, but was mainly focused on providing English news, and that shut down a while ago. So yeah, that was one of the reasons why we decided to start that here. And something that's very interesting too for me is that in the last like 5 or so years is really where I've noticed a lot more people becoming civically engaged here, especially young people who are radical and are really demanding accountability and transparency from their local government, which I think is part of the flow of like having your parents settle down in a town and like kind of work really hard and you know like and then people, you know, starting to create some of the changes that they've been wanting to see, including like myself, right? Starting a local newspaper with others who grew up here.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you all for just giving us more of a sense of place. You know, and one of the reasons I returned to local reporting after spending a few years in national is because I really miss that sense of place and that feeling of like, no, you guys, Tyler, Texas really matters. Or, you know, I don't need to tell anybody that Oakland, California really matters, but I'm telling you that it matters for reasons that you may not be aware of. So it's really helpful to get rooted in this way. So I'm going to ask what's going to seem like a very obvious question. And I want to preface this by saying, I'm going to relieve you all of the burden of having to tell us when I ask you, why did you decide to do this? Don't feel that you need to tell us journalism matters, public discourse matters. We want people to be civically engaged. We're among peers here. We're among friends, right? So what's the deeper story? Like, public discourse, strengthening democracy, you know, people deserve, especially marginalized communities, underrepresented, chronically underserved communities. Like we are all here and we all know that part and we are with you on that part. We're all bought in. What's particular? What's specific about what you're doing and why you're doing it? Let's start with you, Andrew.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, Andrew, let me just jump in real quick. And also, please feel free to make it about yourself, where you are in your career, where you are in your life. Like, why now? As journalists, we often care about why now, right? So, you know, don't feel you've got to give us the 30,000 feet view. You know, feel free to make it about your community and yourself. Andrew, sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. A couple sort of points of background information, one about the community and one about myself. Door County used to have, or technically still has, a local community paper called the Door County Advocate. It technically still exists, but doesn't have any staff that actually are full-time and working in the community anymore. Corporate ownership has decided to make it just basically a wire paper. But as recently as the mid-90s, they were putting out 96 pages of local news a week, all produced by local staff, and that is effectively gone now. So that's sort of part of the backstory of where I came from in starting this. And then personally, as I was starting my career in journalism, working in other places, just kept hearing stories about, you know, school board meetings or city government meetings in Door County and going, why are there no reporters covering this? What is going on? And so it kind of took a few years of that happening, and then watching some of the economic trends around inequality that really motivated me to try to start this. I think just the one other thing I'd say is that Door County, I think like a lot of small communities, it can be tough to have pretty direct public discourse about issues because everybody knows each other. You know, you might have a family member that's on the town board.
Yeah.
We have sort of on top of that dynamic, because we're a tourist community, there is this sort of unspoken urge to like put on a good face to the world because we need to promote ourselves. And so a lot of the really most difficult issues that need to be talked about can tend to be swept under the rug. And so that was part of my motivation for starting Knock as well.
Yeah, I could talk about that last point you made for many, many hours.
Sure.
Irina, what's specific to where you are in your life? What's specific about your community, where your community is at this point that felt like this was the time to try?
On a personal level, like I was at a point where I was very discontent with the way that immigrants and especially undocumented communities are portrayed in, you know, journalism or in media, or often feeling like the news that's produced wasn't super helpful in, you know, daily civic life. So I was kind of looking for both. I was looking for a different kind of career, and also I decided like, well, why, if I'm mad about something, like why not try to do something to change it and really embody what I'd like to see. So I was lucky enough to actually participate in City Bureaus, which is another like in-member reporting fellowship, and that's kind of where I got my transition into journalism. And then, you know, I did start thinking more about like, why is it that I'm going to Chicago, or why is it that I'm going to other places for these opportunities? Like, why can't I have them in my own town? And again, digging deep into the reasons why, like, it wasn't easy for me to participate here. So I started out just interviewing, talking to people, residents here, about what they'd like to see. And I was lucky enough to meet two other people here in Cicero who had kind of been noticing the same things that I had. And, you know, it was really us coming together, us three, and really talking about the need for a local newspaper where, you know, it kind of got started. Like, if it had just been me by myself, which is one of my points of advice, like always try to work with others, right? Find your people, find strength in your people and in making things work. And really that's what, you know, what was the impetus behind like us actually launching Cicero Independiente. If it had just been me by myself, it might have taken me like 5 more years to do so or something. So
Yeah, the importance of getting a few people around a coffee table, a kitchen table, you know, cannot be understated in all of these endeavors. Sonam, what about you? You know, why now, both for you personally and for Atlanta?
Two things come to mind. One for me personally, and I think this does like resonate with others, is, you know, I've been a freelance journalist and reporter for a lot of different publications beforehand. And what I felt like I was doing over time, this is just me kind of being cranky and jaded, to be clear, but I kind of felt like I was reporting on my communities. I'm from Atlanta, immigrant communities, communities of color, for audiences that were not them, because those are the ones that would pay me. So readers who were wealthier, readers who were not directly affected. And the change model of that, I was starting to have some doubts about. I think there's so much amazing impact that can be done from a top-down perspective, from government, from, you know, that's really important, but it just wasn't, I wasn't seeing it. And so I felt starting to feel a little discouraged about it. And so, you know, what ended up happening is that in 2019, one of Canopy Atlanta's six co-founders brought together a room of like 20 journalists in Atlanta just to start talking about like opportunities for things to change. I think a lot of us were just people who are kind of feeling the way I just said I was feeling. And, you know, kind of like Irene, like I think what we started finding was not only like commonalities and these patterns of, especially around the need for more to be writing for people that were directly affected by these issues and to be involving them and having them lead actually like the journalism about them. But also like we just started finding that like the people in the room that were thinking about this thing were amazing. And like we could really do something really cool together. And, you know, none of Canopy Atlanta's 6 co-founders nor co-leaders today had actually ever worked together before, but we really liked each other and we really wanted to do something cool together. And I think that's what we've done so far.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really great story. Norine, coming to you.
Yes. So here in West Orange County, I had noticed that our main city paper, the Orlando Sentinel, they were shrinking their coverage of like the outer suburbs, and they were focusing more on state and county, Orange County. And that was leaving things that they were not covering, like our areas. Meanwhile, we had a local paper. We have a local paper. They were covering local things, but just like on a surface level. And I read at one point in our local paper about the 5th grade play in one of the local prep schools. And I thought, that's what you put in the school newsletter. That's not news. And I mean, we're among friends here. So, I mean, that really made me angry because in our area, we have real issues. There are real things to cover. And I also noticed in our area, there was like no Black representation or no communities of color being covered in our local papers. So what you could find lots of were store openings, restaurants, the best of this, the best of that, the best of the other. And I was like, but there's no news. There's no real news. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do. Our publication, and we're online only, our publication is going to focus on a very narrow slice of news, government, politics, and social justice. And we're going to go after what people aren't reporting. So like we cover 30% of our editorial is about the Black community. And we go to city commission meetings and we ask hard questions. Initially, people didn't know what to make of us because nobody had ever sat there and challenged the city commission on anything before, and they were just gobsmacked. So oftentimes I'm not the most popular person in the room, but we've made some change because we've pushed, and we've pushed hard. So that's why we started VoxPopuli, because of the 5th grade play at the local prep school. Because there wasn't.
Love that. Could talk about this for hours. Andrew, Norine, you both have spoken to an element of this work that brings me to a question that's really for all of you. You've spoken about this sort of like, there's parachute journalism, then there's, I just reported on something that, ex city council member really didn't want to be discussed in public, and here he is standing in front of me in the grocery line. I've had that experience. You guys have maybe had an experience like that. This person, this person's kid goes to school with my kid, like that sort of thing, right? When we're talking about small town journalism, neighborhood journalism, you've got skin in the game. So I'd like to, give you all an opportunity either to speak to that aspect of this work, or what's another aspect of this work like you could not have learned about or prepared for in a million years in journalism school, right? I went to journalism school for grad school. My experiences in Tyler, Texas and Oakland, California, like they don't teach you about this civic navigation piece of this work, right? And it's I think the most important piece of this work in many ways. So, just wanted to open it up to anybody to say, how have you learned to navigate that aspect of it, which is both a very beautiful thing and frankly a very difficult thing at times. And what else, do you feel like, oh, you could, this is something I've learned in the last year, 2 years, whatever, that I could never have learned in J school.
Did you want me to jump into that?
Sure, go, please, anybody dive in. Norine, let's start with you.
So the bumping into somebody, in a prior life, I was a theater and dance critic. So I've developed kind of a thicker skin for that, and know how to kind of navigate that there's work, and then there's also social. So, we're doing our jobs. The city council member or the city commission member, he's or she, they're doing their job, and it's my job to, criticize, and, then there's outside, and we can have a civil engagement outside, and it shouldn't spill over unless there's criminality involved, and then that's a whole different thing. So I kind of learned that through theater criticism, to the point of what I didn't learn and what I've learned in the last year. Fundraising. I'm a journalist. Marketing, fundraising, development, that learning curve is steep, and I'm crawling up that hill, and it's a tough one. And I think I read something from the gals who started the 19th, and they said, don't underestimate the business aspect and the money aspect. Really focus on that. And I went into this thinking, I'm an editor, I know how to do this, I'll be fine. Yeah. The money thing has been a real steep learning curve. That's the thing that.
So I'm going to save our last panel question for that point, that question of support. And thank you, Norine, for opening that door, because it's a really important door, and it's a really complicated one. Anybody else on, what I could never have learned in J school?
I feel like this experience has like taught me how to be a better citizen, if that makes sense. And I mean that like lowercase c citizen, of just like how to be a better person who like moves in the world. And I think that part of that is just like, I think a lot of like people who are from the communities that they cover, especially journalists of color, like just know how this plays out in many cases where like your sources are often your high school classmates. And like, you have to like navigate, like you have to navigate these different dynamics a lot of the time. But like, I think like moving with like transparency and empathy and like building these like actual relationships instead of just like, calling someone up when you need something from them. I think like, moving from just being a reporter to like, co-founding and co-running an organization, I think has even like more aggressively taught me how to do that. Cause like a lot of those folks are now our supporters. And like, I think there's so many blurred lines that you have to figure out how to like navigate. And I think it just requires just a lot of intention and thought and just like strong values.
And working against, tides of people feeling that the work we're doing isn't real work, right? Certainly something I've had to deal with, especially in more quote unquote conservative communities. And also, somebody spoke to, I think it was you, Norine, perhaps spoke to that feeling of challenging somebody who's sitting on a public commission, and that hasn't happened to them in a long time because other local news has shrank, or maybe never really did that to begin with. And so we're having to re-educate people about the power and potential of this work, and the fact that it is real legitimate work that is needed and valued. Unless anybody else wants to jump in on this question. Okay, I'm going to move us to one last one before we go to audience Q&A, which is this question of support. Sonam, you had an interesting thought about the word sustainability, and I'd love to toss this to you. I think I know where you're going with this, and I'm really eager to hear your perspective on it. So my question for anybody who wants to jump in on this one, and don't feel that you have to, because oftentimes, I can certainly speak for myself, this is a very evolving landscape, and sometimes you don't quite know where you feel about where your support is or coming from until you're a little further down the road. So what does support look like for you right now, and what does sustainability mean to you? Sonam.
Yeah, I'll start us off. So we were like really deep in the planning and pitching of Canopy Atlanta in like late 2019. So I think everyone knows what happened a couple of months after that, which is the pandemic. And we had been asking some local foundations for support. The environment in Atlanta at the time was that there wasn't local support for journalism. Most journalism organizations were for profit, and we had a lot of interest, but like no one had done that before. And so when the pandemic hit, actually that kind of diverted a lot of local priorities. And so we ended up kind of around April 2020-ish with $50K in the bank, and from one funder who didn't want to support us. And we made the decision at that point, especially given how much the pandemic laid bare all of the different inequalities, even more so in Atlanta and across the nation. Like we were just like, let's go for it, and just to see what happens. We're we at least know we can do one, what we call like community issues. Let's just go for it. Let's just see what happens. And so since then, not only after we launched and after our first issue, did we not receive so much individual support, which we thought we needed, like a lot of people from institutional funders or with a lot of money in the bank to be able to support us. But seeing that grassroots support, I think, was actually the thing that told us, hey, like we should actually keep doing this. But also we started to see other funders get excited by the work that we were doing on a shoestring budget and move ahead. And so, I'll say that, especially for grassroots organizations focused on communities of color, and especially in the South, we don't often see a lot of local support for us at first. Usually we have to go to national funders, and that's also been the case for us. But we're actually seeing that change really fast in Atlanta, especially given how our state has become the center of the national, conversation around elections and everything else. So that's been an environment that's changing. And then just really quickly on the question of sustainability, I think for us, we have our 2-year plan that we just finished. I don't know if we have a plan that's set in stone beyond that, and I don't think we want to. For us, we are trying to put ourselves out of business by trying to create a city and region that actually not only is representative journalistically of the region, but also like gives agency to people to use information to do what they want with their lives. And so that's our longest term vision. I think in the interim, what we're trying to do is to keep our organization as responsive to the communities we cover as possible, to change and how we shape our organization based on what they tell us. And so we're expanding some of our work in the next 2 years because they've told us that. But we also want to make sure that we're not creating a 10-year plan that's based on what we want and not actually what people need.
Yeah, really powerful advice. Anybody else want to jump in on this question of support, sustainability? How are you keeping the quote unquote lights on?
One thing that I agree with a lot of what Sonam just shared about sustainability, and I would add too, like about adding pathways or like making sure that we're doing work that allows others to take on leadership within our organization and in community too, but within our organization, and have the power to really make that needed change. Because like we're not working in a silo, right? We're organizations that are part of a network of organizations and people and community that are trying to inform, make communities better, or increase capacity of people to become civically engaged. So our sustainability isn't just ours alone. It's about like the sustainability of our community, and part of that is being able to create ways to give people power to change things, and for us to be responsive as organizations too, as the conditions around us change. So everything that Sonam said too, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you. There's some really great questions from the audience here that I'm going to start digging into. Here's a really great one. For those who did work in, or I don't necessarily mean a full-time staff job, but have, had professional interactions with traditional newspapers or traditional news outlets earlier, what lesson or lessons did you take from that work? Positive lessons, negative lessons that helps you do your work better today? Anyone want to jump in on that? Yeah,
I'm
Andrew,
happy
please.
to. Just briefly, I had an editor at a previous reporting job who I think took a pretty forward-thinking approach to sort of declining resources for newspapers in general. And we're among friends. This is probably not news to anybody, but his approach was to really focus on sort of issues-based coverage rather than events-based coverage. So I was an education reporter, and he said, "Don't cover a school board meeting if there's nothing newsworthy on the agenda. We're not going to cover a meeting just for the sake of covering a meeting." And that's really informed the way that I've approached our coverage as we're sort of growing in resources. How do we sort of prioritize stories while we're still small at the beginning?
Yeah, it's really smart.
We prioritize this may just be ridiculous to state, but we prioritize excellence in our writing and our reporting. It should always go without saying, but in our market, it does not. So we've actually lost some writers because they can't withstand our editing process. We're still really new. We're only about 18 months old, and we don't have an enormous budget to pay the kind of writers that I would like to be able to lure. But I come from national magazines. I'm used to writing at that level. I've had that level of editors, and the managing editor comes from the Associated Press. So we expect that level of expertise and that level of excellence, and we don't allow stuff to go in, even at our low pay rates that isn't at that level. So, even though we're small and we can't cover everything, we, what we bring to the community is a level of excellence. So that's what we
Got it. Yeah.
I've had a number of other nonprofit jobs where I feel like I've seen a lot of things that we don't want to replicate, or where often the internal structure of an organization is deprioritized for the work. And I think going into like founding our own newsroom, there's this pressure to like produce and like do a lot of things so we can get funding, and like we're wearing multiple hats. But it's equally as important, I think, for us to create organizations that are good to the workers, to the founders, as well as like what we're doing. And that's why I think it's so important from the beginning to like talk to people and make sure you have support, and and your priorities are informed by community. Because when you get to a moment where you feel like you have to cover everything, or like you have to do like an intense amount of work, you can just go back to your priorities to help you decide like what you've already determined needs your attention, and to really like create structures and like internal policies that support that kind of focus, so that we're not like burning out or working like 60 hours a week, which I know a lot of people do and like feel that they need to do. But it's part of that sustainability to like how we're creating organizations that are good to the people that work in them, and like pay them well so that they want to stay and continue to become involved and help just make an organization stronger.
It's that question, right, of like, who do we answer to? Do we answer to primarily, first and foremost, like, oftentimes national funders are well-intended. They don't know these communities, right? And they don't know what's going to have the most impact. They're not going to know what people want, Sonam, to your point of like, what is it that people actually want? In my experiences to date, it's so powerful to start in community. It's so powerful to start with listening. And rather than have sort of a top-down vision of what this work is going to look like, have it be, organically growing from relationships, from what you're hearing, and from our own experiences, right, as members of these communities. So I resonate so much with what you're saying. Another great question, unless anybody else wants to jump in on that one.
I just wanted to.
Oh, yes, please.
What Irene said as well around not just like that being an issue at traditional newsrooms, but also like nonprofit industrial complex kind of stuff of like that, like I think that's, starting something new is such a good opportunity to reimagine what something can look like. And, I just appreciate that point as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What's one lesson that you've learned that is a lesson of what not to do? And, I'll throw one in, for myself. When I was founding a local news site in East Texas, I very much felt that pull, Irina, that you're describing of like, oh, we've got to look like the daily newspaper somehow. Like we've got to like have a bunch of content, and quickly pivoted away from that, and would really advise people to like start with, if you're going to put your time into something, start by meeting your community where it's at. Like go to other people's events, invite them to yours. The storytelling and the journalism really matters, but don't mistake quantity for quality. And you can do one really great, community engagement effort, reported series, event, whatever. And people will really appreciate that and want to talk to you about that, want to engage with you around that, maybe want to support you around that for like a really long. Sorry, my exuberance, I muted myself. So, yes, the journalism really, really matters, but understand that journalism isn't just one thing. It doesn't look just one way. And like relationship building is a part of that journalism as well. So that's just one from me. Yeah, anything that you've learned that you're just like, yeah, don't do what I did.
I've got one related to, starting off on a shoestring budget and like, being, which is great for us in many ways, because I think for us, was a shoestring budget and became, it created this proof product that we then were able to get more funding off of. But like the downside of that is, burnout. It's not, paying yourself for I don't even know what the fraction is. That's how small it is for the amount of time that you're working. And, I think we're finally gotten to a point where we're not doing that anymore. But I'll be honest with you, like within the last year, I had like this breaking point where I was just like, I am doing way too much. I'm not paying myself enough, and it's not sustainable. And so, to that point, sustainability is not just the financial sustainability of your organization. It's like, what's sustainable for you? What's sustainable for your team and your communities? And so I think, what I would suggest you not do is just try to suffer as long as you can, because that's just not going to, that's not going to serve anyone. And, obviously a lot of funding on the front end is something that helps reduce that. I don't know if that's always possible in every situation, but that is something I would suggest you not do.
Completely agree
Andrew.
with everything that you just said, Sonam. I also started out really without a budget and just kind of started doing the reporting because of seeing the sort of economic fallout of the pandemic, and said, we'll figure out the business model aspect of it later. There's certainly some great lessons learned in that. I don't know that I would necessarily say don't do that, but if you can, for anybody who's interested in starting a local nonprofit news organization, even if you can't get funding or a lot of funding at the outset, like have as many meetings with people as you can to try to get a sense of the community's needs, and just like do a lot of that networking before you launch and before you sort of, fully commit yourself, whether that means quitting another job or whatever that looks like for you. I think to sort of tie it back to the support question, we're still relatively new, and I don't have a great sense of what the support answer looks like long term. But I think something that I've been realizing recently is that our mission around trying to build better public discourse and better conversations between different facets of our community really ties together well with the support aspect of it, and sort of just having those meetings and doing that networking around what people's needs are and what people are looking for, I think kind of leads to, or seems so far for us to lead to, support as well.
Probably if I had it to do again, because VoxPopuli started with 2 reporter editors, probably I would seek a third person with a solid business background or a solid development background, or an advertising background, things that never occurred to me, because I find myself wearing the development hat a lot. And I've had to learn how to do that. Like, we're right in the middle. We're 2 days away from a major fundraiser. And the amount of time that I put into our fundraiser is time that I have not been spending creating content for the site. I've missed 2 stories that broke in my backyard, major stories that I have not had the wherewithal to cover because my staff has been otherwise engaged on other stories or on vacation. So I'm embarrassed because we haven't had those stories literally in our backyard because I've been tied up with a fundraiser.
And I encourage you to make that part of this fundraiser, right? Here's 2 stories I couldn't cover because I need your support. We're coming to the end, so I'm just going to share one quick story. In Oakland, we have, with the Oaklandside, my newsroom, we are a team of 9. That's 3 editors, 5 reporters, 1 amazing visual journalist. I think I got my math right. I've started, when I'm out and about, doing my Woman About Town thing, meeting with people for coffee, going to events, I play a little game where I'll ask people, I'm curious, how big do you think Oaklandside is? How many people do you think work in Oaklandside? And the range of responses I've gotten has ranged from 20 to 50. Some people might be proud of those answers. I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem that people don't realize that this group of 9 people with, let me be clear, a parent organization behind it. So there is that element of it. but I don't think it's a good thing that people think it's 9 people, that people don't realize it's 9 people doing what they think is the work of 50. So we're journalists. We're so good at telling other people's stories. We've got to tell our own. And that's kind of the final thought I want to leave us all with is, tell that story. I want to be here for you, and I hope that you'll be here for us. And it's that relationship building. It's that opening a door to allow people to help you sustain this work. I was right there with you, Norine, feeling embarrassed around it. And I encourage you and I encourage myself and all of us to get to that place where we actually feel proud that we have the ability to do this. And we're proud of the relationships that we're building in our communities to help us sustain this work.